Since it's time, we would like to start the 374th YIES, so Yomiuri International Economic Society lecture meeting. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Masakazu Tokura, who became the chairman of the Nihon Keidanren, or JBF, Japan Business Federation, in June of this year. He is the 6th chairman. Let me briefly introduce him. Mr. Tokura was born in Nishiwaki City in Hyogo Prefecture, and in 1974 he graduated from the Department of Economics of Tokyo University and entered Sumitomo Chemical Industries, currently renamed Sumitomo Chemicals. In 2011, he became a representative director and president and has been serving as a chairman since 2019. He is known to be a very cheerful and sincere person, and Mr. Yoshinori Tokura, the physicist, who is a strong candidate for the Nobel Physics Award every year, is his real younger brother. Mr. Tokura apparently was good at math during his student years, and he says that when it comes to math, putting aside physics, he was far better than his younger brother Yoshinori-san. That's his pride and joy. The theme of today's lecture is Revitalizing Economic and Social Activity While Living with and After COVID-19. So he'll be talking about his management principles and philosophies and sustainable capitalism after Corona and the way forward for Keidanren. So, Mr. Tokura, if you could please take the stage, and please do welcome Chairman Tokura with applause. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tokura, the chairman of the Japan Business Federation, or Keidanren. I was told that the YIES was established in 1972. I'm very much honored to speak in front of you at the YIES that has such a long tradition. Today, I understand that there are audience aside from Japan, and therefore I prepared the PowerPoint in English, but my presentation will be given in Japanese. I assumed the post of the chairman of Keidanren on June the 1st this year. This year would have been a year of the final year of former chairman Nakanishi, a year to add the final touch to the accomplishment, and yet he fell ill and passed away on June 27th. To succeed his chairmanship in front of daunting challenges both within and outside of Japan, added with the COVID-19 pandemic, it was extremely difficult for me to make such a decision to assume this important post. And yet, knowing what is right and not doing it is a want of courage. And therefore, after assuming the post for the past 6 months, I have been striving with my limited ability to inherit and develop the policies that were laid out by Mr. Nakanishi, Society 5.0 for SDGs and Sustainable Capitalism. On behalf of the business sector, representing Keidanren, I am attending various meetings that gather representatives from the government to give the policy recommendations. I know that my task requires such an intensive concentration, and in view of the imminent challenges, I don't have the luxury of time, and I always feel that the 24 hours a day is too short for me. And today, I'd like to share with you my views as well as initiatives by Keidanren on revitalizing the economy amid the COVID-19 pandemic and in the post-COVID-19 era. Here is the content of my presentation today. It consists of 5 chapters. First, I'd like to talk about sustainable capitalism. Second, what we have been working on as Keidanren under pandemic. And third, the new growth strategy that was formulated by Keidanren last year in conjunction with various challenges in society and economy. And number 4, especially, I'd like to highlight a green transformation, or GX. And finally, I'd like to share with you my thoughts and belief on those issues. So let me begin with discussion on sustainable capitalism that we endorse as Japan Business Federation, or Keidanren. As you may know, since 1980s, as is represented by Reaganomics and Thatcherism, the excessive capitalism and market fundamentalism that was prevalent all over the world resulted in two major issues. One is about a widening and the entrenchment of the disparity, as well as the reproduction of such disparity everywhere. And then comes the dysfunctioning ecosystem as is represented by climate change and newly emerging infectious diseases such as COVID-19. Needless to say, the free and vibrant competitive environment, efficient allocation of resources, creation of innovation, and capitalism, market economy, those are basic, the fundamental elements at the social and economic activities of Japan. And yet, in view of challenges that surround us, I believe it is high time for us to give a fresh look at how we should continue on capitalism. In the meantime, we see the increasing wide recognition about the sustainability as is represented by SDGs and ESG investment. And in fact, the Business Roundtable of the United States, they clearly stated that they will focus on stakeholders' value instead of shareholders' value, and World Economic Forum as well. They also endorse stakeholder capitalism. And in fact, there is a major current in global economy about rectification of excessive shareholder-centric capitalism. And that is why we came up with the sustainable capitalism. And the situation is also applicable to Japan. We are seeing the sluggish and long-lasting the growth, the sluggish growth of income, widening income gap between urban and local areas, and also social common capital is heavily damaged. This is a concept advocated by the world-famous economist Hirohumi Uzawa. That includes natural environment, social infrastructure, education, medical or healthcare, such as institutional capital, are included. I mentioned about dysfunctioning ecosystem, the failure to respond effectively in view of the risks including the healthcare and economy security, declining science and technology capacity. And those are the challenges that cannot be solved by market economy alone, and the role of government is increasingly important. And then came a Kishida administration embracing new capitalism, and I believe this is quite timely. And in fact, a new capitalism and sustainable capitalism that we support as Keidanren are compatible with each other. And Kishida cabinet launched the new organization Council for the Realization of a New Form of Capitalism to introduce the virtuous cycle and the growth and distribution and the development of new society in post-COVID-19 era. These are the elements of new capitalism, and I'm also a member of the meeting. Sorry, the slide is rather busy. And in fact, this is a PowerPoint that I used in the very first meeting of that took place on October 26th about new capitalism. First, it is essential to establish fundamental concepts and then define the basis of policies for Kishida cabinet. And then on top of that, I highlighted the following 3 points. The first point, this may be taken for granted, but our economic activities are in operation based upon capitalism. And when the growth is so sluggish in Japan, the growth is a key. Without expanding the pie of economy, there is a limit to what could be distributed. And now that we are seeing the shift from shareholder focus to multi-stakeholder focused the system, we should consider the growth and distribution as a package. The second point is about the so-called social common capital, the institutional capital and natural environment, and how to address the development of such social common capital is a key to the growth. That is, the COVID-19 highlighted the failure in Japan for risk management and slow progress in digital transformation. Well, digital transformation is a most effective tool for all-inclusive society realization and local promotion. And above all, we also should promote green transformation toward a carbon neutral in 2050. All of them are imminent challenges for Japan. Furthermore, I would say that the GX and DX promotion would lead to or induce more investment within Japan. And in fact, this is what was designed for under the third arrow of Abenomics. This would directly lead to economic growth of Japan. Third point is what I mentioned earlier. Those challenges cannot be resolved by market economy alone. That points to the extremely important role to be performed by the government. In a green sector, that we see massive public spending by Western countries and slow progress of digital transformation in Japan. They point to the need for the industrial policies to be undertaken by the government for promotion of GX and DX. And also, it requires power of science. That means we need to upgrade the basic ability of promoting research and development, especially this points to the need for improving the science and math education. That's for realization of new capitalism, importance of growth, the social common capital development, and important role of the government. Those are three focal points that the discussion should center around. That's what I mentioned with expectation. Again, this is a very busy slide, and this is a PowerPoint that I used at the second meeting on November the 8th. In discussing new capitalism, I mentioned that as a discussion point, the green transformation is rather lacking. First, about the disparity and dysfunctioning ecosystem, the new capitalism should concentrate on the following three areas. First, to secure the resource for distribution, the growing economy has to be ensured. Second, safe and secure social system to eliminate anxiety and concern about the future. And third, sustainable global environment, mainly green transformation. Those are three areas for concentrated efforts. For the growth of economy, the Kishida administration advocates promotion of a science and technology-oriented nation. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, we should also consider how we can advance digital transformation and green transformation. Second, safe and secure social system. That requires the development of a risk management system, reconstruction and the revamping social security system, and education to support science and technology-oriented nation. And for sustainable global environment, the climate issue, that is imminent and issue that requires urgent response. And together with that, we need to promote and advance green transformation. And in that context, when we look at the establishment of the science and technology-oriented nation, it is considered as a first pillar under growth strategy by Kishida administration, and they are now taking an initiative in development of the risk management system. And also, the Council for a Vision for Digital Garden City Nation realization is currently being in the process of establishment, together with the Council for All Generation Social Security. And when we look at those initiatives, I realize that the green transformation is lacking. And that's what I highlighted in my discussion. And also, green transformation could be the pillar of the growth of Japanese economy. At the same time, as the name transformation implies, it requires changes, transformation on the part of industry and the people. And thus, green transformation should be one of the important themes of new capitalism to be discussed across the government organizations.
Next, let me explain Keidanren's initiatives concerning COVID-19. We at Keidanren pride ourselves in always staying ahead of the government in delivering effective proposals. So please look at page 8. To the left are Keidanren's recommendations, and to the right are the government's responses. I have positioned COVID-19 responses a priority since the day I assumed office on June 1st, and have already made 4 policy recommendations. In June, when I took over as chair, vaccination was already recognized as the key to stemming COVID-19, but back then, half a year ago, Japan was lagging behind in vaccinations. So I compiled an emergency recommendation on the day I was inaugurated and hand-delivered it directly to Prime Minister Suga. It urged the government to aim for collective immunity by winter by swiftly establishing a vaccination delivery system. And at around the same time, the former president of Osaka University, Professor Hirano, and honorary professor Mr. Miyasaka, both immunology authorities, made similar recommendations, so we collaborated. And vaccinations were conducted through local governments, but the local governments' handling and administrative handling of vaccinations became a bottleneck. So we decided to collaborate to create a simpler system. At the same time, we also called on member companies to speed up workplace vaccination and to urge employees to take post-vaccination leave to facilitate the vaccination of workers. Prime Minister Suga announced the goal of 1 million vaccinations a day at around the same time. So it was a case of a perfect match between government's policy and Keidanren actions. There were many issues along the way, but the goal was always speed over perfection. As a result, as of November 25th, 76.5% of the entire population had received 2 vaccination doses. That's a little less than 200 million shots completed. And more than 80% of all vaccination candidates aged 12 or above have finished their second dose. Regarding the vaccination and test package, Keidanren proposed the use of vaccination records in inbound and outbound immigration procedures, as well as for domestic economic activities as early as June 24th. We also proposed exit strategies and roadmaps along with practical user guidelines toward the normalization of social and economic activities. The government followed with their respective actions that's shown on the right-hand side of this chart. So going on to page 9. However, unfortunately, in the summer, there was the spread of the Delta variant. That was the 5th wave. Vaccinations took off, however, was still halfway toward the goal, and the issue of the strained healthcare delivery system became a problem. On September 14th, Keidanren issued its 3rd policy recommendation to resolve and prevent the collapse of the healthcare system. We recommended securing hospital beds and healthcare workers through a fundamental review of the current healthcare delivery system. Also, we recommended the sales of antigen test kits approved by the Ministry of Health and Labor Welfare at pharmacies and drugstores, and recommended the use of such test kits for people even without symptoms. We also recommended shortening the post-entry quarantine period from 14 days to 10 days, also quarantine exemptions for vaccinated individuals, and resumption of visa issuance to foreign nationals. As a result, the government followed with an economic stimulus package by the Kishida cabinet. The government began to actively engage in strengthening the healthcare delivery system. The MHLW has also issued instructions on September 27th to allow ministry-approved antigen test kits to be sold at dispensing pharmacies as an exceptional measure. And the quarantine period for inbound travelers who have completed vaccination was shortened from 14 days to 10 days. on September 27th. Now going on to page 10. A new recommendation towards sustaining social and economic activities in balance with pandemic-containing measures, recommendations to the new cabinet on COVID-19 responses was issued on November 16th. The document recommends giving the central and local governments strong command and control authority and institutions to combat the public health crisis, and the establishment of early treatment cycles at general hospitals using oral remedies, as well as promoting the development of domestic therapeutic drugs, vaccines, and booster shots. The recommendation also covers the revitalization of social and economic activities using the vaccine test package, the early deployment of economic stimulus for distressed industries, the normalization of immigration control based on data, the digitalization of vaccination certificates, and other science-based measures to regalvanize social and economic activities. Going on to page 11. The current lull in the COVID infection is the result of a national effort by the entire Japanese people to overcome the fifth wave this summer. And today, things have recovered enough to enable this kind of a large in-person lecture meeting. My respects and thanks go to all healthcare workers, the government, and others concerned. This graph compares the vaccination rates at key countries derived from Our World in Data, an open data source operated by Oxford University. The data compares Japan with the US, UK, Germany, Israel, and India. In Israel, which took a rocket start in vaccinations, and in Europe, the share of the fully vaccinated population lingers at around 60%, while Japan topped 70% and is approaching 80%. Back in June, probably everyone, including the minister in charge back then, thought that Prime Minister Suga's goal of 1 million shots a day was impossible. So we owe this fact to Prime Minister Suga's strong leadership. Going on to page 12, this graph compares COVID-19 deaths per million people in the same countries. There's a yellow arrow on the graph, the sharp decline with the spread of vaccination since summer is noted with the yellow arrow. And the chart highlights the low death toll in Japan by international standards. This chart on page 13 compares daily new COVID-19 cases per million, also for the same countries. Israel, the US, and European countries struggle to contain new cases even with widespread vaccination. However, Japan, though affected by the Delta strain, has succeeded in keeping down new cases. And that's testament to, well, I think this is probably the impact of collective immunity through the rapid vaccination program since winter, and is testament to the diligence of the Japanese people who continue to wear masks and follow the hand-washing protocol. Now, this is a comparison of the number of hospital beds, and this shows that Japan far outstrips other advanced nations in terms of the hospital beds available. Page 15, this is a list of currently available cures for COVID-19. What was once an unknown virus with no remedies aside from evasion of human contact is now expected to transition from a pandemic to an endemic, thanks to the power of science, which enabled the development of messenger RNA vaccines, along with neutralizing antibody cocktails and orally administered drugs and other therapeutic drugs. This means that COVID-19 in the not too distant future will most likely transition from a pandemic to an endemic. However, no one is safe until everyone is safe. So there's no meaning in just one country maintaining safety. in Europe and the US, authorities have failed to control new cases, which are again on the rise. The reopening of social and economic activities will have to assume a world with COVID for the time being. So speedy policy formulation and execution based on scientific verification and theoretical analysis is essential to balance COVID-19 containment with economic and social recovery. Lastly, it's necessary to review why the fourth and fifth waves of the pandemic caused such huge disruptions in Japanese society and what lessons we can learn from the experience. I think the biggest learning was the absence of crisis management and response. The government lacked the authority to allocate the cases to hospitals, despite the large number of hospital beds available. Also, I think that there was a delay in vaccination approvals due to an obsession with safety, an excessive insistence on safety. And you'll probably remember Israel, South Korea, and Taiwan were very, very swift in their responses. And these three countries are living side by side with crisis all the time. And it's necessary for the Japanese government to also consider more seriously the risks involved. And I believe that Mr. Kishida had advocated that need during the election campaign for the LDP presidency.
Now I'd like to move on to the main theme of today's presentation. That is about the medium to long-term growth strategy with COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. And we formulated the new growth strategy with a period in front in November last year. And the period here is not the typo. This is to indicate that we put the period to what has been maintained as a growth strategy and then present the new strategy that embodies the thoughts of former Chairman Nakanishi. And now I'd like to share with you this new growth strategy and also my views on challenges in Japan. Simply put, this new growth strategy is a strategy to establish sustainable capitalism. I'd like to elaborate more on specifics. Through this strategy, by 2030, we have a future vision of the world and Japan that is to focus on 5 stakeholders, that is consumers, workers, local communities, global communities, and Earth's future, and then a value co-creation with those 5 stakeholders embodied in here and take actions toward the future. And the 5 ways to achieve that is about the new growth through digital transformation, transformation of work styles, regional revitalization, rebuilding the international economic order, and green growth. So those are exactly the 5 challenges that we have to come to grips with. First, about the digital transformation for new growth. As a common foundation to realize new growth, promotion of utilization of data, and more investment into new talent and research and development, and promote startup, among others, are included in here. Through use of data, we should promote healthcare industry as a new growth industry. Digitalization of education and STEAM education, among others, for human resource development, establishing resilient supply chain, and digital government promotion, among others, are included in this strategy. Page 19. 2 points that I like to refer to and for digital transformation. First, the key to digital transformation is about the realization of all-inclusive society by making the well-being of diverse people and the optimization of the value of a society at large to make them compatible. For instance, even living in an isolated island or in remote areas, you can enjoy the best education and the best class healthcare. We often hear about the traffic accidents involving elderly drivers, and they are now requested for giving up their driver's licenses. But if autonomous driving is prevalent, then they can go anywhere, even when they have a problem with the walking. And this is exactly the Society 5.0 that the government as well as Keidanren have been promoting. And I am a member of the Special Council on Digital Transformation under Kishida administration and the promotion of digital transformation in healthcare, education, but also the use of my number and for realizing the virtuous cycle of the growth and distribution. The government has to eliminate anxiety about the future by the people. And through use of my number, we can expect the right level of burden according to right level of benefit. Therefore, this requires the revamping of the social security system. And once anxiety and concern about the future is removed, then the people would feel free to spend when they receive a pay raise and instead of saving them. And this would lead to further growth, and finally there will be the virtuous cycle between the growth and distribution. This has been actually exhausted in various committees and meetings in the government, but the question is now or never, as Professor Murai of Keio University states. And now that the digital agency is instituted with Kishida administration, this is a high time to undertake the drastic reforms for the convenience of the people. And this is exactly what we discussed at Digital Advisory Committee. Next, about the human resource mobility, that is about the flexible work styles not bound by time and space, the mobility of the human resources, the promoting activities by diverse people, a society that is conducive to having and rearing a child, among others. And about the changing working style, in the report we published last year, we stated that we have to consider two factors. That is, first, the reduction of the work hours, that is to reduce input. This is what was emphasized in the reform on work style in phase 1. In phase 2, we now emphasize as well the increase of output. Key to that is the enhancement of the engagement by workers. For that, we should consider how we can create the work style that is diverse and flexible, that it focuses on autonomy and independence of workers. In other words, the legislation may have to be revised that is conducive to a working style that is not bound by the working hours. And digital transformation, green transformation, includes the word transformation of the society. Industrial structure of Japan has to be transformed. The reskilling and recurrent education for facilitated the human resource mobility into the growth industry is another challenge that we have to work on. Now, page 22, this is about the regional revitalization. The flexible work style through work style reform would facilitate the flow of people into local cities, local universities, small and medium-sized enterprises, startups, local financial institutions, local municipalities, together with the large businesses, would create the ecosystem. And in case of a disaster, for instance, if the local transportation means and the logistics infrastructure are damaged, we have to create distributed supply chain that is resilient as an infrastructure to maintain the life of the people in local areas.
Let me make 2 points on regional revitalization. This is page 23. First, the Keidanren in November 2011 published its policies for action to achieve revitalization of the regions and concrete initiatives with different partners in an action program for regional co-creation. And we also published a set of case studies of regional co-creation activities by member companies and associations. And this is divided into 3 programs. First is objective of the program is to mobilize and attract diverse talent Second, to continue to create new job opportunities. And third, to enhance the attractiveness of regional cities. After the launch, concrete collaboration efforts will be promoted based on the program, which will continue to be updated regularly so as to ensure action. The second point is about digital transformation as an effective tool to bridge the gap between cities and regions. The Kishida Cabinet launched the Council for the Vision for a Digital Garden City Nation. The Digital Garden City Vision aims to promote the digitalization of the regions to narrow the disparity with cities and allow citizens to enjoy the vitality of cities and the relaxed comfort of rural life. Keidanren believes that achieving the Digital Garden City Vision is, in fact, achieving Society 5.0. Next, on rebuilding the international economic order, which is another pillar of our growth strategy. This is page 24. The new growth strategy aims to maintain, expand, and deepen the free trade and investment system by realizing FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, by enhancing the scope and quality of economic partnership agreements or EPAs and overseas sales of infrastructure systems. The strategy also calls for leadership in data-free flow of trust rulemaking, that's DFFT, to help build trust in data utilization. And we also call for efforts to ensure proactive and strategic economic security in our growth strategy. Let me also cover 3 points on international cooperation. This is page 25. First, the importance of international cooperation. Needless to say, Japan is a resource-poor nation with no options but to collaborate with the world. COVID-19 has painfully reminded us that no man is an island, or no country is an island. That is, no one can survive alone. We can't afford to let international cooperation fall into empty words. The Israeli historian Professor Yuval Noah Harari raises 3 issues that cannot be resolved through isolationism, namely nuclear warfare. Second is ecosystem collapse, that is, of course, climate change and COVID-19. And third, AI and biology and genetics, such as disruptive technologies, which, if misused, could lead to the destruction of the world. And Professor Harari says international cooperation is necessary to resolve these issues. Likewise, challenges from emerging infectious diseases like COVID-19 and climate change cannot be overcome by countries acting alone. Japan must strengthen collaboration with like-minded countries that share common values such as freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Another case of international cooperation is the CPTPP, now attracting global attention with the successive membership bids by the UK, China, and Taiwan, but thoughtless pursuit of scale should be avoided. The most important thing is to accept countries and areas that meet the high-level requirements. And frankly speaking, I want the U.S. to return to the TPP as soon as possible. That's my personal view. The second issue is economic security, which I will illustrate with supply chain resilience. Discussion on supply chain resilience have begun between Japan and the US and Europe, and the Quad countries, that is US, Japan, Australia, and India. It's an issue where cooperation amongst countries and regions with common values is indispensable. However, supply chains were developed by individual companies based on their economic rationale. Therefore, it's important for the government to become involved in areas that touch on national security to enable a cohesive approach based on a national strategy. However, excessive government involvement can be harmful. So companies should be allowed to choose from a menu of effective resilience measures based on business circumstances. Keidanren is asking the government to clearly identify the scope of technologies that must not be leaked so as to increase predictability for businesses. Honorary Professor Mr. Kishi of Tokyo University, who was the former science and technology advisor to the foreign minister, once said, "Science knows no borders, but technology does." A shrewd and coherent strategy for both the government and the private sector will be required. Prime Minister Kishida regards economic security as a major policy pillar and has appointed a dedicated minister to the issue. Keidanren will communicate closely with the government to support its economic security efforts and work to ensure the freedom of economic activities and business predictability for all. The third point is on US-China confrontation. The current focus on economic security arose from intensified US-China rivalry. This is page 27. What started as trade conflicts was elevated to a competition over technological hegemony and then to an ideological confrontation between both countries. Under these circumstances, decoupling supply chains for the US and China will not be a desirable nor realistic solution. This chart shows the levels of bilateral trade amongst Japan, the US, China, and EU. All regions are interdependent and closely integrated, as you can see from the chart. The world cannot live without China, and China cannot live without the world. Therefore, our relationship with China must be one of competition with cooperation. Our new strategy also advocates green growth. This is page 28. To achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, Keidanren calls for accelerated innovation through new technologies, focused support for renewable energies, and the use of nuclear energy.
29ページ目をお開けください。
The level of carbon dioxide in the air has climbed up above 400 ppm from 280 ppm before industrialization. In other words, we have come to a point of no return. However, it further moved to 450 ppm, then will be beyond tipping point, and there is no way of limiting global warming. And ever since I became the chairman of Keidanren, GX has become one of the highest priority areas, and we are currently engaged in discussion extensively on this matter within Keidanren. I'd like to touch on this later on. I've so far mentioned about 5 pillars in the strategy. As you know, now we have Ms. Namba, the first vice chairman of Keidanren, the first woman chairman to vice chairman, and she has been emphasizing the importance of startup, and therefore I'd like to add her remarks here. And at Keidanren, we want to raise the number of startups by tenfold and also increase the level of success by 10 times as well. Centering around Ms. Namba, the vice chair, that we are working on various initiatives from the point of view of human resources, education, financial, taxation, regulation reform, among others. And also, Startup Committee was established in May 2019 to first to come up with the policy advocacy to create an environment that is conducive to startups. And secondly, the organizing various events, promoting partnership between startups and large businesses. For policy advocacy, we have started various activities from startup point of view in the Startup Policy Task Force. The task force members only comprise the representatives of startups, and that they could participate even when they are not the member of Keidanren. And through those activities, we believe we made some contribution to taxation to facilitate open innovation system. And since October 2019, we started hosting networking event in the name of Keidanren Innovation Crossing, or KICS for short. And since March 2020, due to the pandemic, we are organizing this event remotely. So far, we had 5 face-to-face meetings and 18 online meetings. The total of 23 meetings took place to take advantage of the strength of Keidanren. At KICS, the members from large businesses are only limited to company, the top management in charge of open innovation and new businesses to realize high-level networking. For promotion with startup, it requires initiatives on multiple factors, that is, human resources, education, finance, taxation, the regulation reform, among others, and those have to be taken into account. And from human resource point of view, we need to consider how we can promote mobility of the human resources, the employment practice, and the labor management, among others, the safety net in case of failure. In fact, for startups, there are various challenges that we have to consider. Education as well, how we can nurture the spirit of independence. You know that the people want to be, or the people are unique and different from each other, and yet in Japan, homogeneity it has been prioritized to among the members of the organizations. And also we have to consider the industry-academia partnership and university reform, together with the regulation reform to make up for the delay or the loss made by slow digitalization. And in fact, there could be various ways to support startups, including the initiatives by SBIR, or Small Business Innovation Research in the United States. And in fact, the startups, their partnership with a local academia, it could be the key to local revitalization. Regardless of whether it has to do with the startups, we have been discussing matters related to education reform, labor issues, industry academia partnership, university reform, deregulation, local revitalization, among others. And by effective coordination of those discussions, we hope that we could come up with comprehensive viewpoints on promoting startups to take advantage of the strength of Keidanren. I've so far explained about the new growth strategy and the challenges, and I'd like to once again come back to green transformation. Let me repeat once again, the level of carbon dioxide in the air is increasing so rapidly, and once it reaches beyond 400 ppm, we have to say we are now there in the point of no return. And if it is beyond 450 ppm, then that will be beyond a critical point or tipping point. There is no way to stop global warming. I have to say that the sense of crisis seems to be not that intensive in Japan compared to the Western countries. Yet, I have placed one of the highest priorities on green transformation ever since I became the chair of Keidanren. This is a comparison of the nationally determined contribution. 2050, there seems to be a distant future, yet that would come sooner than later. And in fact, through innovative technology, we are trying to overcome challenges that are associated with the climate change. Yet, the new technology development that will require 10 years, and then that will be first put in place for testing, the pilot study, and then finally put into practice widely in the society. That will take more than 20 years. And yet, when we try to reduce the greenhouse gas 46% by 2030, I have to say that is extremely challenging. And I don't think this requires the detailed explanation, but to realize carbon neutral, then we have to consider how we can reduce the use of fossil fuel. There could be 6 directions. First of all, promotion of renewables and nuclear power to secure and expand the use of zero-emission power source. Nowadays, fossil fuel, 40% of them are used for power generation. And then using zero-emission power source, what used to be based upon heat source, it could be turned into the electrification. And yet, if there are some the remaining need for heat source, and then we should consider the carbon-free hydrogen and ammonium that would be the carrier. And yet, we cannot eliminate carbon completely from the Earth. Well, decarbonization seems to be somewhat misleading. The human consists of amino acid and protein. All of them are made of carbon. Pharmaceuticals as well. Carbon that is easy to design and quite strong and resilient as a molecule. Therefore, there is no way we can eliminate them completely from the surface of the Earth. Being the chemistry specialist, I know that so well. The question is how we can eliminate the emission into the air. Therefore, we can think of recycling, like carbon recycling and chemical recycling. And number 5, for energy-intensive industry, like a steel industry, zero-carbon steel, the process innovation is essential for such an industry, and this is not limited to steel industry. The fuel oil and synthetic the fuel to achieve zero emission in car industry as well. And number 6, as energy infrastructure, the incorporation of a renewable into grid, as well as the batteries and energy storage, the next generation electric system has to be developed and established.
This is page 37. In my inaugural speech in June as chairman of Keidanren, I announced the reformulation of our low-carbon society execution plan into a new action plan for carbon neutrality. And on November 8th, the plan was published as Keidanren's action plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. It outlines our vision for 2050 carbon neutrality, consisting of 4 pillars: emissions mitigation, collaboration between entities, international contribution, and development of innovative technologies. The most important message in the plan is that the government's commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050 has led to similar pledges from all industrial sectors of Japan. That, I think, was the most significant outcome. Going on to page 38. However, these action plans for carbon neutrality represent voluntary pledges by each industry. There's a limit to what industries can do toward a carbon neutral future now, when even zero-emission energy sources have yet not been established. Therefore, we have to seek policy support from the government. For example, to promote green transformation, we need to discuss energy policy issues such as the deployment or replacement of SMR, small modular reactors, etc. And of course, replacement or deployment of nuclear power. And in the future, issues such as the development of nuclear fusion technologies or hydrogen fusion technologies for the future. And carbon neutral will not end in the year 2050. The efforts must continue on to the generations of our children and their children. So we must continue to pursue this path until we can achieve an ideal future, perhaps of using nuclear fusion. And if GX transforms Japan's industrial structure, then we need more discussion on labor issues such as reskilling to increase labor mobility. And carbon pricing is another topic where credit trading or cap and trade, carbon taxes, and cap and trade is, of course, emissions trading, and other measures should be considered widely to contribute to growth and to transform society. When we talk about carbon pricing, people often associate that with carbon taxes, but that's not all. We must consider a wide array of policy mixes that include credit trading and cap and trade. And Europe has introduced the CBAM, carbon border adjustment measures, and they are waging a very cunning economic diplomacy. The overseas procurement of hydrogen and ammonia requires economic security considerations, which means that we need discussions on foreign and national security policies as well. Also, Europe and the US are investing in green initiatives through the Green Deal. And these are conducted through strategic, multi-year, large-scale fiscal projects as part of the government's medium to long-term industrial policy. So I believe it's opportune timing to revisit Japan's practice of single-year budgeting and start considering multi-year budgets. And sustainable finance, green finance are also very important efforts to endorse this. So as you can see, discussions on green transformation, or GX, entails many very important topics and therefore should include or involve all government ministries and agencies as a critical theme to realize the new form of capitalism. In closing, allow me to share my personal beliefs and thoughts. This is page 40. Earlier, I talked about the concept of social common capital by Professor Uzawa. On the left-hand side of the chart, it's described, and Mr. Uzawa was a theoretical economist who was said to be Japan's closest candidate to the Nobel Economics Prize, and he said that there were many issues which could not be resolved through market principles. And therefore, he advocated the social common capital. The most important thing is from the social point of view, that is, to place a social point of view into the market economy. That was the most important point. Social common capitalism should not be left to market forces, he said, but rather should be controlled using market economy measures or mechanisms. As you know, the so-called mainstream school of economics, represented by Mr. Friedman, the assumptions of this neoclassical school of economics, such as the homogeneous Homo economicus, or resource forgeability, is really not realistic because they regard the economic man as being the same anywhere. But that's not true. People are different. Therefore, what we need is capitalism or market economies that looks at the real society and at real individuals. So what is fair distribution? What is justice? These are the fundamental issues that we must question. Meanwhile, John Rawls, in A Theory of Justice, and this is written on the right-hand side of the chart, he talked about the duology of justice. One is to recognize personal freedom insofar as it does not violate others' freedoms. But the second principle is the most important. That is, he talks about equal opportunities. He recognizes that equal opportunities of economic activity will create inequality, and however, even under these circumstances, the most underprivileged people will still be improved or should be improved. That is a presumption. Inclusion or all-inclusive society, which is endorsed by the SDGs, I think is really what he's talking about. Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism talks about the maximum happiness for the maximum majority. And there was this also started with skepticism toward the view that the people's happiness should be uniform and the same and can be calculated. That is the importance of looking at the inequities and addressing the inequities and recognizing the free economic activity of individuals, but still tolerate the inequalities that may arise there. We need to brush up this wisdom of procedures. Of course, our economic activities remain predicated founded upon the principles of capitalism and the market economy, such as free and healthy competition, efficient allocation of resources, and innovation. However, there is now a global movement to correct shareholder capitalism that focuses solely on the shareholder value and to shift focus on stakeholders. So it may be time for us to revisit the past concepts of capitalism. Keizai, the word in Japanese for economics, comes from the classic Chinese writing, which talks about economics being the operation to govern society and save the people, that it must serve the people and promote their well-being. Also, John Maynard Keynes wrote in a letter to Charles Harrows that economics is not a natural science, but it's a moral science and therefore must entail inner reflection and value judgments. Also, Karl Polanyi of Hungary said that when markets diverges from society, then all will be subordinated to market demands. That is, he talks about the need to regard a social good, fairness, and justice when thinking about economics. And I believe these are the points that must be emphasized as we try to establish a sustainable capitalism. Now, this is a little embarrassing, but this is a photo that's hung in my office as Keidanren Chair. And this is the letter for Gi, a Chinese character, written by my most favorite calligrapher. And my favorite words all end with Gi, Taigi, which is public cause, and Seigi, justice, and Shingi, truthfulness. So when I look back on my past behavior, I must always look at whether there's truth or justice there, where it serves the public good. That's at the foundation of my thinking. So from that thinking, Keidanren, although it is a representative of the business circles, we must also be always supported and endorsed by society and the people. For Keidanren to win the support of society and the public, it's critical to work closely with the Yomiuri Shimbun and the media at large. So I look forward to collaborations with the media. Last but not least, I would like to end in hopes for the further development and growth of the YIES. Thank you very much for your attention.
戸倉会長、どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Mr. Tokura. We're so fruitful and productive in the content, and that clearly indicated his thoughts as well as the direction of Keidanren. Now I would like to move on to Q&A. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. And when you ask a question, please state your name and affiliation before asking a question, and please wait for the microphone. Kumagai of Daiwa Soken, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. At the outset, Mr. Tokura, you mentioned about sustainable capitalism, which is compatible with new form of capitalism that is endorsed by Prime Minister Kishida. As Mr. Tokura mentioned, from now on, the expansion of income by way of growth and the nurturing and development of the middle class, rectifying disparity, and the establishment of common social capital, such as natural environment and social infrastructure, among others, are going to be the areas that we need to work on. I have two questions to confirm what you have asked in your question. First, on behalf of the businesses, as you explained about various initiatives, if you can tell us about the priority of those initiatives and activities. Especially the other day, Prime Minister Kishida stated that he expects the wage hike of more than 3% in spring labor struggle in 2022. Do you think it is really possible to raise the wage by more than 3%? And what is your position as a business sector in view of the spring labor offensive? And the second question, to realize sustainable capitalism and new form of capitalism, what do you expect from the government? And what is the role of the government to be performed as opposed to the roles and functions of the private sector? Thank you. Thank you. First, about priorities. About sustainable capitalism, a new form of capitalism, the key word is about the virtuous cycle. That is about the virtuous cycle between the growth and distribution. If only one of them is achieved, then it is getting nowhere, and that's where we have to work on. And about the wage hike. At the meeting for the realization new form of capitalism, I was attending and took the floor. And according to Prime Minister Kishida, for those companies that have successfully bring back the level of the business back to the pre-COVID, and if their business is successful, then he expects that there will be more than 3% wage hike. And on the part of Keidanren, as we are currently working on this year's report, as our mission and responsibility, the employees they are important stakeholders, and therefore it is a matter, of course, that we would share the benefit with the stakeholders. Instead of shareholders' value-oriented policy, we are now moving toward the stakeholder-oriented policy. At the same time, we have to remember that we are operating within the free capitalism. We are not under the national the capitalism or the capitalism controlled by the national government, and therefore we always have to take into account what we can afford to, and therefore it is all up to each individual company to allocate their benefit. So wherever possible, yes, we should live up to the expectation by Prime Minister Kishida in terms of wage hike. And that's explicitly mentioned, I hope, in the introduction part of the new report. And what we expect out of the government for a new form of capitalism. For government, there is a role to play, and then for the private sector as well, there is a different role. Talking about the wage hike, government is responsible for improving the environment to facilitate the wage hike, including taxation. And on our part, we have to perform our own role. So there is a role to be played by the private sector. And I'm also the chair of the Council on Industrial Structure discussion. And Motoshige Ito, the professor, was there. And he mentioned to the effect that it was a failure of the market that resulted in the dysfunction of the ecosystem and other various challenges, and therefore we cannot leave everything up to the private sector. In other words, the public or the government are expected to play their role by way of industrial policies, and in fact, as some stated, that industrial policy is back. On the other hand, we have to recognize failures by the government. Thus, the public and the private have to be engaged in intensive and active discussion, and then work together and support together to realize such a virtuous cycle.
じゃあどうぞ。
Thank you very much. Next, please.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I'm Mona Khandar, Minister Economic and Commerce from Embassy of India. I have two questions. Considering the new form of capitalism, what are the exact market failures that the present government of Japan is trying to address? I could see the correction for labor class, that is by increasing the wages of labor. But is there anything for the consumers as well, or for any other part of society? And for correcting this market failure, in your presentation, you have mentioned about various measures being taken by the government, and new minister or a ministry has also been created for economic security. So is that not expanding the role of the government, and are we not going to see some of the socialistic features entering from backdoor? Or how you are going to protect the sanctity of capitalism and good features of the capitalism, and promoting role of the capitalism in distribution? My second question is related to improving the labor productivity. So reducing the input and enhancing the output. So with the aging society, how government is planning to enhance the productivity of labor, especially because it will require a lot of skills and other things to enhance their productivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, I am not a fluent speaker of English, so please allow me to respond.
Thank you very much for those questions. Regarding the first point, the collapse of capitalism, the possible collapse of capitalism. As I have repeatedly said, the market system and capitalism is a mechanism that we must adhere to as insofar as we are aiming for growth. People talk about a big government and small government, a large government, small government. Now, are we trying to shift from a small government to a large government? Yes, that could be one way of putting it, but what I propose is not just the size of the government, but the quality. It's the quality of government and governance that's at question. And there are some issues which cannot be resolved now with just reliance on capitalism alone, but this is natural because up to now we have never put a price on carbon, so we never noticed the failures of capitalism in that sense. And COVID-19 apparently arose from wild animals, not domesticated animals. So there are new issues that are arising and accumulating that could not be resolved with pure capitalism. And this is what Professor Uzawa had been concerned about for 50 years. And of course, the private sector must take initiative in resolving these issues, but it's up to the public sector and the government to prepare a conducive environment and climate for the resolution of these issues. So this is not a dichotomy between a big government and small government, but rather a question of the quality, enhancing the quality of governments. And the second point you mentioned was about labor productivity and to make the denominator small and the nominator large. And I think that this is a big issue for Japan. As you know, in Japan, we have a very homogeneous market that has been our strength. And so in the pursuit of efficiency, this is a very effective tool. But when it comes to innovation and generating something totally new out of creativity, you need diversity rather than homogeneity. And Japanese society has very low labor mobility. In other words, I think this is due to the fact that companies have taken too much good care of their employees. So now we don't think that it's good to suddenly shift to a European or Western type of labor practices. I think that we should create a well-balanced labor system that's well-attuned to the Japanese environment. But with the promotion of the green transformation, there will be a major industrial restructuring. And more employees will have to shift to the growth industries. So reskilling, recurrent education are the new mechanisms to enable that. And also people wearing two hats, that is working two jobs. is also important as well, because once you join a company, you work with the company for the rest of your life in Japan. But now we need a shift to a new type of working style, which allows for job hopping and for people to work at different jobs. As you know, Japan is an island nation, and we were said to be a trade-oriented and science and technology-powered country. So we cannot live without the world. We must change what is needed to be changed in order to collaborate with the rest of the world so that we can shine again in the world. I hope I answered your question. Thank you very much. Now it's time to close the session, so if you could please send Chairman Tokura off with hearty applause. Thank you very much.